I'll give you a little bit of my background. I think people have asked. I have been an attorney for almost 28 years. I was a civil litigator for 4 years in trials, and I've been at the Attorney General's office now 24 years, where I've been in the criminal law division. And most of my job has been doing general criminal work, including trials early on, but my work now is mostly as an appellate attorney. So we handle every felony appeal in the state of California, is primarily what our office does. We have a trial division, of which we're very fortunate to have Amanda as one of our trial prosecutors, especially as our human trafficking expert. And we also, we may not have as many agents as we would love, but we have some agents that have been trained by Rich LaBelle in financial investigations and track for many, many years. And I was involved with the Southwest Border Anti-Money Laundering Alliance as one of their attorneys from the 4 states, from California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, where we learned a lot and shared our resources to talk about financial investigations, money laundering, which is one of my areas of specialty. Now, we talked a little bit about California. California is a state about the size of France. And right now we're approaching 40 million people in the state of California alone, of which 10 million are in Los Angeles. California, depending on how the economy is going, has an economy stronger than France and can be either the 5th or the 6th, following with Great Britain. And its border, we have the border with Mexico, and we're not far from Canada. So given that geographical location, given that economic power and the size, it makes it a very attractive area for drug trafficking, human trafficking, and money laundering. And so we have these transnational crimes occurring quite often, and we talked about the scope. What we see is that reverse flow, that the money that comes in illegally then leaves California. And so billions of dollars of illicit bulk cash proceeds from transnational criminal organizations go back, often to Mexico, but can go to other countries. And so California is one of the top 2 states where you have narco dollars, drug dollars, that are seized and to which they're destined. So you have a flow of illegal money from ongoing operations for transnational criminal organizations that are involved in drug trafficking and often human trafficking. And I think we discussed how these drug traffickers in Mexico are now very much involved in human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking. And then they have their corresponding criminal street gang organizations in the United States and California carrying on those activities for them. So you have business going across the border of both human and drug trafficking and this flow of money that comes into California, and then they use the California financial system to send it back into the hands of the criminals and laundering it. So the true scope is not fully known, but it's estimated that 1.5% to 2% of the state's gross domestic product is laundered annually. So could you imagine if 2% or 3% of the gross domestic product of Nigeria is being sent elsewhere because of illegal activities? What kind of financial impact does it have on your country, on your resources, on your law enforcement officials? So in 2012, there was a study, and it was based on California having a $2 trillion gross domestic product, and they said that approximately 30 to 40 billion US dollars could have been laundered. And today that would be even greater. When we talk about the effects of globalization, and we've looked at it as potentially a very positive economic impact. But however, as it increases, California's participation in international trade continues to intensify, and we have transnational criminal organizations that prey on that. So as long as we have this increase in the volumes of goods and services crossing international boundaries, it makes it easier to disguise, launder, and smuggle money that these organizations get from selling drugs and trafficking persons. So we're going to talk about what is a typical money laundering scheme. We talked about many types, but this is normally what will happen. Why do you want to launder money? Because you want to mislead law enforcement and also your financial regulators to mischaracterize the source and origin of the financial proceeds that come from criminal activities, and that's what we call dirty money. So what happens with that dirty money? We want to break up large amounts of that dirty money into smaller, less conspicuous accounts, which are then going to be deposited or placed into your financial system. It could be banks, it could be money services, it can be prepaid bank cards. There's a myriad of ways that they can do it. But this is typically what will occur. That large sum that was bulk illegal will be broken down into smaller sums to make it look more legitimate, and it makes it easier to move. And so then we go through a process of layering. So we're breaking it down, and now we're layering it. So the money launderer is going to go into a series of transactions to try to distance the money away from the source. So the farther away they can get it from the illegal source, the more legitimate it appears to look. And an example is you have funds that get wired through a series of shell corporations in other countries from various bank accounts in the country, or sometimes they're disguised as payments for non-existent goods or services. And I think Rich had the good example about the pencils. That was just the front for the illegal activity, but we've seen double billing, triple billing to show and saying that they purchased one tractor. I'm sorry, that they purchased 10 tractors and only deliver one, but have used that money. And this morning we had the excellent summary about what occurred yesterday, and we were talking about our tools. One of the tools we have, of course, are our laws. And one of the reasons why I think financial investigations and money laundering can help human trafficking, even if we don't have task forces, even if we can't use that crime to charge, is it assists us with our investigation into human trafficking. But it also can be used to show that a economic trafficked organization or some sort of financial crime has occurred, so it's not a legitimate business. So when you see that garment shop and you see that the money is being used to launder and not being reinvested in the business, that looks illegitimate. And so when you see money flowing out of a business instead of back into that business, that's a very suspicious activity that we should be thinking about as a potential for an economic fraudulent crime where human trafficking may have occurred. So in California, we have a penal code 186.10, that gives us 4 elements of a money laundering offense. So first, you have to have a person who conducts or attempts to conduct a transaction or a series within a 7-day period. So we're looking at a 1-week period. And it has to involve a monetary instrument or instruments of a value that exceed $5,000. That's our threshold requirement. And it has to go through a financial institution or financial institutions, and you have to have the specific intent to promote, manage, establish, carry on, or facilitate the promotion, management, or carrying on of any criminal activity. So you have to have a predicate crime, but you have to show that that money is being moved for a crime, or in the alternative, with knowledge that the monetary instrument represents the proceeds of a criminal activity or is derived directly or indirectly from the proceeds of a criminal activity. What is a financial institution? Under California law, and it defines as including banks, savings and loans, and credit unions. But what are these? We can have check cashiers, exchanges of travelers' checks or money orders, a licensed money transmitter, so Western Union is included, a currency exchange. On the border, they're known as casas de cambio, but you can have a bureau de change. Any money changing business is a financial institution under California law. Securities, investment banking, and insurance is also a financial institution. We talked about how insurance could be used. You can have a fraudulent insurance policy to launder money and have somebody else claim the money and clean the money for them. And then they have to be engaged in legal or non-legal activities. So casinos, card clubs, bookmaking, betting is often used to launder money. Travel agencies are financial institutions because they receive and deposit money. And sometimes using the travel agency to move people, you're also laundering money the same way. Escrow companies, and sometimes Delivery holding packages. We sometimes define our delivery services, United Postal Services, Federal Express, as a financial institution. Because often what we'll see is cash will be placed in a delivery service and a package is sent from one person to another. And here, our health and safety code usually prohibits certain narcotic activities. And this one is Health and Safety Code 11,370.6, and it involves possession over $100,000, which is a lot of money, bulk cash. So if a person possesses cash or negotiable instruments of over $100,000 that result in the sale, possession for sale, transportation, or manufacturing of controlled substance of a narcotic, with knowledge that the money is derived from that unlawful activity, or you can use it if you have an intent to buy or committing acts in furtherance of buying with that money, narcotics. So we have a money laundering provision that specifically addresses drug trafficking, but it has a high threshold of $100,000. In addition to state money laundering, there's certain federal money laundering statutes that can come into play. And often, as Amanda described, we may not agree as to who's going to have the money laundering charge, but if it's federal, we may refer it to our federal counterparts in the United States Attorney Office and still help us, because we can get that person on state crimes on one side and federal money laundering on the other. Under the federal statute, which is Title 18 of United States Code, Section 1956, Subdivision A1, which is their general money laundering statute, it applies to a person who conducts or attempts to conduct a financial transaction with property known to be derived from a crime, and the property, in fact, is proceeds of a specified unlawful activity, which will be defined with the intent to promote that specified unlawful activity, or with the intent to engage in taxation fraud, or knowing the transaction is decided to avoid reporting requirements to conceal the nature or ownership of the proceeds. Remember how we talked about certain recording activities like currency transaction reports. Failure to report can be money laundering. Engaging in tax fraud. One of the things that you may want to work with is your taxation authorities, your fiscal authorities. So if you see someone who is conducting a business with trafficked labor, what kind of record keeping do they have? Are they paying their taxes? Are they paying their bills? Are they registered as a lawful business in your locality or in your country? Because if they don't have that, if they haven't paid taxes, if they are not registered, if they don't have normal expenses that you would see in a business, you may have a business that's illegal, that is being fueled by labor that's been trafficked. Why? Because they don't want to call attention to themselves. Subdivision A2 of the same federal statute is called the transportation offense. So if you have someone who transports, transfers, or transmits or attempts to transmit a monetary instrument or instruments between the United States and another country intending to promote a specific activity, which is then clean money, or knowing the proceeds come from an unlawful activity, that's a felony, and knowingly conceals its nature, location, ownership of the proceeds, or intent to avoid federal or state reporting requirements, is money laundering. So again, this goes back to transportation and knowing if there are limits under your law as to how much money can be transported without reporting or with reporting. And you have many neighbors, and so even if you can talk to your financial regulators to know what the laws are and what the limits are, that can help your investigation and can help your prosecution in a human trafficking case. And this one is unique to California, and we call it the sting offense. This is very, very interesting. I'm sorry, it's a federal offense. It's very, very interesting. And it's under subdivision A3. And this one's called the sting, as you'll see. If someone conducts or attempts to conduct a financial transaction with property that's represented by law enforcement officials themselves to be the proceeds of or to facilitate a specified unlawful activity, or with the intent to promote a specified unlawful activity to conceal the nature, location, source of ownership, or to avoid reporting requirements, then it's a crime. And it's a sting because it's a federal officer who's saying, here, why don't you conduct this transaction for me? And that's permitted under federal law. It's very close to entrapment, but it's permitted. And if the person goes through with that specified unlawful activity and conceals the location, the nature, the source, or ownership, you're getting somebody else to do it, or avoiding reporting requirements, they're laundering money. One of the things that we can see from this is how technical money laundering can be, and that's why you'll need to consult with a money laundering expert, usually an attorney, if you can, and an investigator to see if you've met these elements. If not, to assist your case and determine whether that activity is occurring. This federal statute is very similar to the California statute, and it's section 1957, and it's money laundering if you knowingly engage or attempt to engage in a monetary transaction with criminally derived property with a value greater than $10,000, and the property is from a specified unlawful activity. And we see that $10,000 range always with the currency transaction reports. That's why it's at that level. Any questions at this point? I know this is very, very technical, but I think if we can learn, even with our own laws, our technicalities with money laundering, it will assist our investigations. This is a California code that deals with money transmitters themselves. So Western Union, money services banks, money services, and this is within our state financial code, sections 2000 to 2172. So a transmitter, if you have a person or a business who sells or issues payments, instruments, or stored value, or receives money for transmission inside and outside the United States, and they know that they're supposed to be licensed, but they're not, that is an unlawful transmitter. And I think Rich gave you a good example about who could be considered a transmitter, an individual. So is it halal? The system where there's an informal situation where money is being lent, or even a personal transaction where money is being moved back and forth, that person is a transmitter, whether they know it or not, and can be charged with transmitting money. And you may have a similar law, but that informal arrangement, which you can't back up with documents, but if you can show that that transaction existed, that could be unlawful, and it would be unlawful under this statute. Hawala, I'm sorry. The anti-structuring statute, remember how we talked about how they break down from a larger amount to a smaller amount, often to avoid reporting requirements. This is the statute that's used federally, which is Title 31 of the United States Code, Section 5324, Subdivision A. And it prohibits a person or a business from structuring transactions to avoid the reporting requirement of cash in excess of $10,000 through one or more financial institutions. Or if you have multiple cash transactions to purchase traveler's checks, money orders, or cashier's checks of less than $3,000, which is a reporting requirement there, to avoid verification and reporting under federal law. So if we know that someone is breaking down amounts to avoid the requirement to report, they are laundering money.
Real quick, this is something that we use this charge frequently. It's especially relevant to country and you're sending more from one country to another, as in your guys' example, where they're using the MSBs to send money. This is something we charge people. That's part of the money laundering charge.
Now, where we see it more often, as Rich pointed out, is we see it when people are crossing the bulk cash in excess of $10,000 and not reporting, or sending wires and not reporting the $3,000, and trying to do it below the level and doing multiple transactions. So if you see someone that's making 20 wire transfers, just under $3,000, to avoid the reporting requirement, or are bringing 2 or 3 cars that are crossing the border to make more than $10,000 and they're not reporting, that could be a crime. And so you have to look at the pattern of how they're moving the money to see if they're intentionally trying to avoid reporting it to commit fraud. We talked about the Financial Center from the U.S. Treasury Department, their Financial Crimes Enforcement Center. And FinCEN in the United States can research and analyze information and provide other critical forms of intelligence to support financial crimes investigations. So they're the ones who do the currency transaction reports, the suspicious activity reports, can do Interpol case tracing or tracking, investigations, high roller DMV, or check cashier's permits and request the forms. So whoever your financial investigation unit is, you may want to request reports or other types of assistance from them and work with them. And you can say that you're doing so solely and specifically for trafficking purposes. And hopefully they will be willing to work with you. But we use other resources. Our franchise tax board is our state taxing agency. We have to pay state taxes as well as federal taxes. And so they may be a wealth of information. The other thing that the franchise tax board does is businesses must pay state taxes. If they're not paying their taxes, if they're lying about their taxes, that could raise a red flag. Employment Development Department, that is the agency that ensures if you're not employed and will pay you in case, and you must register your employment. That can be a big source of finding out if fraud is occurring.
Does Nigeria have an agency that you think that Tony's just described these agencies do?
Yes, we have like we said yesterday, like I said yesterday, NFIU. Then majorly like a U.S. State Treasury is basically like our own central bank here in Nigeria. And most of the financial transaction of banks and Western Union and any MoneyGram wired money that comes in and goes out, they have the data and the figures in their custody. So what happens is when in the course of investigation and you want to prompt or you want to know the financial capacity or the financial transaction the suspect have done, it is we right, like they said yesterday. But I think what we are learning now is an eye-opener that we need to give attention to the frequent of MoneyGram, Western Union that an individual is doing so that it can spur up an investigation to actually know what is the intention of that sending of that money. Is it associated with trafficking? Is it associated with any crime? So I think that is the new area we are going to start looking in now.
What about like labor agency, labor-related, employment-related, or tax-related agencies that cover those things?
Yeah, we have like for tax, we have the FIRS. For the federal, then we still have the state board of internal generation. Yeah, similar in such some ways, but it's just that the modification may be different.
Are you able to collaborate with those agencies? Or is there a working relationship? I know there can be kinship, but with these types of agencies, are you able to work with them and to share resources or share information?
You know, now, like I said to you now, that most of our job now is the collaboration and the looking at the suspect. But we have not gotten to the level of taking this financial aspect that will prompt investigation to be able to, you know, now what you are saying, what happened in the United States of America is when you observe a transaction, that transaction, if it is too frequent, it can prompt up investigation to know the reason we have not gotten to that level yet.
I'll give you an I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Often these agencies will see something suspicious. For example, if a business is registered and they say they only have 3 employees and they only pay a small amount of taxes, and sometimes these investigations will go investigate. Maybe the franchise tax board to see if they're properly paying their taxes. And they go to this business and all of a sudden they see 20 children working. They can be a source to say, we believe human trafficking is occurring, and hopefully we'll call you. Hopefully, if you have that relationship, we'll call you and say, you know, we believe human trafficking is going on there. Maybe you should investigate this. Another one that we have is ABC, which is our alcohol and beverage control. Any alcohol license to a business must be issued by this agency. And to do so, they have to register and give a lot of information. Do brothels sell alcohol? So you have brothels that are selling alcohol as part of this activity. Are they licensed to do so? Some are. If they're registered and for whatever reason, someone goes to inspect or reissue a license, and they see that activity going on, all the sex activity, do they call you?
And that's really important, because we look around this room, or you look around your office, you see how many of you there are, right? There's enough that we're only filling one concept. So there's only so many sets of eyes, and so many places that you can see what's going on with the number of people in this room. Whereas if you have eyes and ears of the tax agency, and you have the eyes and ears of the employment and the alcohol and beverage people, that doubles, triples, quadruples the number of eyes that are out in the community or out in places of business looking for signs of human trafficking. So it'll often, in our experience in the United States, it's now become often that it's those individuals who actually identify the trafficking first.
Yes.
Because they're best situated to see it. Because people, A, businesses don't always know they're coming. B, businesses don't think that they're being looked at for human trafficking, because it's not a police officer who's showing up at the door.
Yes.
So that collaboration among the agencies can be really, really important, and also helps to leverage resources so that you can see more potential trafficking situations with the limited number of people you have at NAPDIP.
And the other thing that's very important with the taxing agencies is they can tell you where the money from that business is going, or where they claim it's going. And you can start connecting names or other businesses that can lead you to other resources. So if you see that there are payments going out to the same person or the same organization, that might raise a red flag that they're part of the trafficking network.
But you know what this really represents on like the grander scale, the macro level, and Amanda touched on it yesterday, and it's something that when we do trainings, we talk about it all the time, is it's the holistic model into how we investigate trafficking, right? Because we talked about it, I don't know for how long this morning, the difficulties with victims and how it is, you know, getting them into court and ensuring they're going to testify, and all of the problems that comes with having a victim show up in court. These type of things are what you really have to arm yourself with, the ability to do this, to give yourself more weapons to try and defeat traffickers, because we can't do it just by relying solely on victim testimony and things of that nature.
And as for all the prosecutors in here, a powerful tool is to get someone from the alcohol beverage control to, as your witness, to walk into court and say, when I went to inspect and issue the license, I saw this business and I saw 20 young girls going in and out of rooms. That moment. And this is what occurred and this is what I did. That's a witness that you can use to start building your case as well. Because you would say a normal establishment like that wouldn't have 20 or 30 children working, or prostitution going on, or whatever you would want to establish, but they could be another source, another witness to help you build your case. And they usually will testify because they're government employees. They'll be required to testify, and they can be some of your best witnesses. Getting a tax expert to come in and testify as to how the money is flowed or how they haven't been complying. All of a sudden, the judge is thinking, this is not a legitimate business. They must be conducting something illegal. And you can help build your case around that type of testimony. Any questions or observations at this point? But we highly encourage you to work with your counterparts in these agencies or administrative agencies, because it can be a wealth and a source of information and give you potential leads and give you good testimony when you have a trial and you may not have enough resources or victims to testify.
I would like to ask you a question. Like in Nigeria, where most of the financial flows ultimately pass through the CBN, so to speak. And in America, does the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank have any superintending rule over some of these transactions?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
I said, like in Nigeria, where at some point in the financial flows, the CBN, that is the Central Bank of Nigeria, I mean, there's no way you can actually bring the money into Nigeria through the wires, or except through the CBN. Is it the same thing like in America, where you have the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank doing the oversight? Yes.
Trace it all the way across. But often what you'll see with these agencies is if you see business fraud, they may have committed it in another country and they're wanted in another country. And you can say, we have a business that conducts fraudulent activities in Nigeria, and we want to know if they're happening across the border. And maybe that person is wanted across the border. And that could be another powerful tool. And so you now have, or their associate is wanted across the border. And they're wanted for the same thing, for tax evasion, or they didn't have their proper liquor license. And those regulatory agents that connect with each other can be a good source of information for you as well. And you may need to reach out, and hopefully you have those relationships. And they can be informal. Often you won't need a treaty because they'll be willing to work with you because they're losing revenue as well.
Countries that you guys will routinely communicate with in terms of investigations? I mean, are there some that are better than others?
Wait, let me.
So did you say France, Britain, and Spain?
So let me say something.
Nigeria Benin, it was called Nigeria Benin Joint Commission, and then they meet from time to time and then discuss the issues of inflow of traffickers and their victims, and there's an arrangement for return of their nationals to them, and then we're receiving our nationals. So that relationship exists. But the one with Netherlands, Spain, and the rest of them doesn't really exist at this level. There is a level of, it doesn't really exist it exists at the top level actually. So not at the level of, yes, investigator, personal investigator, and the management, the country, yes.
Sorry, please. Let me take you back a little. When you go to the previous slide, you have what you call Board of Equalization. Yes. Equalization. What is really that board of equalization? Can you throw more light on it?
Our Board of Equalization is what I like to call our sin taxes. So they collect taxes on cigarette sales, on casinos sometimes, and we'll see, because we know that casinos can move money internationally. They can be a great source. Or if someone's laundering money, believe it or not, you can launder money by selling cigarettes. You can take a cigarette that's less expensive, let's say in Nigeria, and go to another country where it's much more expensive and you're selling those cartons. You're laundering money with those cigarettes. And you would want the Board of Equalization or your equivalent to help you, because they would tell you whether they paid taxes on those transactions. And I talked about perfume as being something that we saw with Mexico. You know, did they pay their taxes? Did they do their business? And sometimes in Mexico, what they'll see is a legitimate business, a department store in Mexico, we'll see who's selling the same perfume. We're seeing all of a sudden someone's walking in with Chanel No. 5 and they're selling it for less. And that's hampering their business. And then we can say, well, who's selling it? Ah, this person. Where did that person get it? Back in California. How do they pay for it? So now you take that reverse flow of money and you trace it backward. And you take that trace backward to the source, and you see where the laundering, the illicit scheme occurred. So things like Board of Equalization are very helpful. Cigarettes, any item. Because we talked about trade-based money laundering being a big factor in human trafficking. These institutions can help you identify trade-based money laundering or illicit trade-based activities that then you could send and trace back to human trafficking and connect them. So they are good resources. So you're using other agencies to help you with your investigation. And you're already doing a lot of work. You're already, and you need the entire picture. If they can be helpful to you in this holistic approach to fill every gap, to fill every activity, then you'll have a better investigation and a better prosecution. Because ultimately what we're doing at trial is it's almost like putting a puzzle together. And when you can put the entire puzzle together for the judge, you will have successful prosecutions.
Okay, I just want to draw your attention to some peculiarity that is attached to Nigeria and Africa in general. You see, when it comes to tax evasion, even the regulatory body who is charged to take up tax evasion or the less declaration of tax, we rather see it as a financial crime. We hardly relate it to other crime that is associated with it. We just see it as that person that evaded the tax, that he has committed a financial crime of not declaring his or her tax, or of not declaring the company tax. So it is stopped at that. So when the person or the organization is being prosecuted, they only prosecute that person just for that evasion of that tax. And which has given an insight now that in Nigeria, we have to change the narrative. We have to change it in the sense that we don't need to look at one angle for prosecution. We should not look at it that is evasion of tax is strictly financial crime. It may be associated with all other crime, which we need to pop up. That is one. Then secondly, again, another peculiarity that we have in Africa is, for instance, the relationship between Nigeria and Benin. Now, a trafficker or somebody that recruits small children, who brings the small children to Nigeria, Lagos in particular, to work as a child slave, or that is labor trafficking. You see, the money that is acquired from such trade will be very difficult for us to track. You know why? Because they take it by cash out of Nigeria. And when they are going back, they will not follow the legal route. Our borders are so porous that the illegal route, which is just behind the legal route, a lot of them goes through that place. And there's no law enforcement. There's no measure to check them. So it is a difficult situation now to be able to track financial movement within Nigeria, other country within the sub-region of Nigeria. So I think we just need to start changing the narrative and bringing some drastic measure in place to be able to pin them, because financial transactions have a great deal in knowing some of these activities, because it's through the finances that you know the enormous of the activities they're involved in.
Yes, and the one thing is we need to look at financial crimes. Often they're important, and you look at someone and say, well, it's a person is committing financial crime. What's the big deal? They're stealing money. But what they're doing is they're defrauding your country's financial institution. It's a fraud on your nation, on your banking system, on your economy. And it's being facilitated with human trafficking as well, and other unlawful activities. So the holistic approach will look at the human side, of course, but also the financial side if you can use it, because it impacts your locality, it impacts your country, and it impacts other countries as well. And when they realize the importance of how it's impacting them as well, they'll work with you. They will work with you. We have done that with Mexico, and sometimes we can do it informally, but one of the things I know TRAC and that Rich has done, which is incredible, is they are now working with Mexico's Banking and Securities Commission. They're the ones who regulate not only banks, but money services businesses in Mexico. Because what's Mexico seeing? Mexico's seeing narco traffickers use these money exchange houses to take Mexican currency out of their country and doing it illegally. They're losing their own money. And then it's coming back with dirty US dollars. So we're seeing the illegality of money leaving Mexico and then money leaving the United States back to Mexico. So who's the fraud on? Both of us. It impacts us the same way. And the same thing with the human trafficking. It comes out of one country and it goes back to the other, and that circle is the international, transnational crime that impacts two nations. And when we realize that, we will be better off working with each other and working a holistic approach to combat human trafficking. And I can tell you, if you take the traffickers' money away, or you strictly limit their money, what's going to happen? It's an economic-driven crime. You get rid of their business, and they're going to do something else, or they're going to get out of business. And that's a very powerful tool. Very, very powerful tool to try to use to combat this scourge that is human trafficking.
That was Mexico
Yes.
years ago. Mexico's undergone a number of changes in the policy in the past 10 years.
And the other thing that Mexico, it sounds like, in many respects, they did not work with each other. Very similar to what we're hearing, where one Mexican agency would not work with another Mexican agency. And so their financial people would not work with their prosecutors and would not work with their local authorities. And so you have to use your local, your state, your federal, and your international resources, as well as your financial resources, to work on these crimes, because the traffickers are using those resources against you. They use borders to hide with each other, and they use financial institutions to hide their proceeds, or trade-based money laundering, and they're always one step ahead unless you can work together.
Okay. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Please, I'd like to know at what point does a particular crime become okay, we hear things like federal laws and state laws in the United States.
Sure.
And then at what point does it become a federal crime? For example, money laundering. At what point does it become a state crime? Which one takes precedence over the other?
An easy one for jurisdiction is if it crosses international borders, it's going to be a federal crime. Usually, but we can still, in the activity within the state, we can charge that as a state crime as well. And so the fact that you can get someone for federal money laundering doesn't prevent you, if your state statute allows money laundering, to also go after state money laundering. So we could have a prosecution where Amanda is in state court, and she has a human trafficking defendant that she's charged with human trafficking and state money laundering. And at the same time, her colleague at the U.S. Attorney's Office is just doing an independent money laundering case on the same guy. And so you're hitting them 2 times, 2 ways, and that makes it very difficult for them. Easy to prosecute. You have two chances to prosecute them, 2 opportunities, and it puts them in more peril. And that's normally how it would work. So if you have a local financial crime that you can charge them with that local financial crime. If you have a national financial crime that you could charge them with a national financial crime as well.
Do you guys have gaps in charge of state or federal? Strictly federal? I can tell you law enforcement in the U.S. With law enforcement in the U.S., a lot of times you weigh whether or not you think you'll have more success in the state system as opposed to the federal system. There are times where we charge cases in the state because you know what, it's going to be easier for us to get a conviction in the state. But there's also certain crimes that carry much more stiffer sentences, actually both in the state and the federal system. So for us, I can tell you, when I was in law enforcement, it was a case-by-case basis.
And the other thing that we'll do is if you can actually get more state crimes than federal crimes, usually you want to charge them with state crimes. For example, as Amanda said, if you have a defendant in state court, you can get them for the human trafficking, the money laundering, pimping under state law, and maybe fraud, coercion under state law, false imprisonment under state law, where in federal court they might only have human trafficking and money laundering. And so you're looking at all these different charges and you can say this could be the more effective prosecution because it may be difficult to prove human trafficking, but I can show false imprisonment. I can show all these other crimes and it gives you a greater opportunity. So whatever will give you the best opportunity to convict that defendant, that's the avenue. And we will talk to the federal attorneys in those cases and to see who's going to have a better opportunity to get a conviction or a longer criminal sentence or bigger restitution. We'll even consider that. Where will the restitution be greater, maybe? So there are factors that you're going to talk about when you're working. And you may do the same, possibly, where you could say, even though it's a human trafficking case, your financial unit will have a better chance at money laundering. You may refer the case to them. And they may look at, and if you build this trust, they may look at their case and say, you know, this is really a human trafficking case. Why don't we go from the financial prosecution and turn it into human trafficking prosecution, and it should be Napteep's case. And so you make those kinds of decisions depending on what's going to be your greater chance to prosecute and your success at trial. And if you work together and refer cases back to each other, you'll gain that level of trust as well. That's something to consider. Any other questions? The other thing that we use is the federal government. We use postal mail. Your mail service can sometimes say, there's a lot of activity or there's some very unusual packages going to a certain home. They can be a good source to lead you to investigate. The FBI has computer crime labs that we use. We talked about the suspicious activity reports that banks will file or money services. They have committees that review these suspicious activity reports. And if they see a lot of them and they think that there might be human trafficking from all these transactions, they may refer the case to you or to Amanda or to the U.S. Attorney's offices. ICE, our border, our customs enforcement, they have databases. So if they see the same car crossing every day, every single day, and then crossing back shortly because they've taken money across from Mexico to the United States, deposited in a bank, wired the funds back, and then they keep doing that in a short period of time, they may suspect money laundering and they will let us know. And Immigration and Naturalization Services, your customs, your immigration officials could have records that could help you as well to track people who are crossing the border often. More difficult in a porous border, of course, but they could tell you this person crosses in and out of Nigeria all the time. Why? And that could raise some investigative leads that will lead you to human trafficking.
Real quick, with those border crossing records, we could call ICE in the United States if you're in law enforcement. You could, it's a computer system, or you can call up ICE and they could give, if an investigator was investigating me, they could give ICE my license plate of my vehicle, and ICE will tell them every single time that my car has crossed in and out of the United States into Mexico or Canada. And it'll also tell you who's in the vehicle, and it has photos of the individuals in the vehicle. So, unfortunately for you guys, with the border being as easy to go back and forth, you can't, it doesn't sound like you guys have anything like that on the border up north. But it was an extremely valuable investigative tool for me over the years, especially doing narcotic investigations with Mexico.
And these are other groups that we use, like the Security and Exchange Committee for corporations, tax filings. Nevada, Las Vegas has a big gambling industry. We use them for casinos to see if they're laundering money, and they will give us information. In the United States, believe it or not, it's permissible to search the trash bin. And sometimes you will find things outside a home that will give you leads, telephone numbers, names. Let's say the madam, the brothel, they have a trash bin in front, and I don't know if it's legal in Nigeria, but you know, they've taken all these numbers that they've written down on paper, and they're in the trash can for pickup. And now there are all these phone numbers that you can find by walking over to the trash can by the brothel, picking it up and saying, okay, here's 10 phone numbers. Let's investigate them. Is it legal in Nigeria to do that? Yes, because it's out in public, so there's no expectation of privacy. Get your hands dirty. Put some gloves on and go into that trash can. And believe it or not, you will find phone numbers. You will find names. Because often their record-keeping system is very informal. They're going to write it on pen, pencil, and throw it in the trash, never expecting that you are going to reach in and pull it out and find that information. And that's a technique that you can use. Very simple, very effective. We have caught drug dealers that way because they have transaction ledgers, which we call pay-o sheets. They'll throw them in the trash. And we've seen that they've been doing drug transactions with a certain person. They put the amount and the drug that they use and the name of the person. So they'll say, John, 10 kilograms marijuana, and we'll have these sheets. You can pull them out of the trash, and you could chart every drug transaction that they made with that person in a short period of time. So use that if you have that at your disposal, or be as creative as your law will permit you in investigating. Often we'll find financial records that were thrown in the trash can the same way. We use consumer credit agencies, of course, Western Union. There are other databases, but one of the best, of course, is TRAC. And that's another thing that we'll use. Court-assisted records. We talked about subpoena for documents. The subpoena deuces take them if we have a grand jury. Or sometimes we'll get an order to get utility, financial, and escrow records. So the electrical bill, the water bill, all of the utilities, we can get those records to see if it's a legitimate business or not, or what they're doing possibly, or what they're spending their money on. You can use those resources to help your investigation. Get the utility records for a brothel. The title. Whose title is that brothel in if it's a legitimate business? And you'll get names, you'll get numbers, you'll get records that you can use, and maybe you'll identify exactly who the trafficker is by using those records, or it will lead you to them. Voluntary compliance. Can you ask people if they'll give you their records? It doesn't hurt to ask. They may say no, but if you ask and they give it to you, you'll get it. Why not? And sometimes they'll give it to you thinking that you're not going to do anything with them. And that can be a source of wealth for an investigator to conduct an investigation. You can get in the United States someone to authorize to release their financial records to you. They may not do it, and you may have to go to court, but if they authorize you to get them, why not? Use them. And if they can do the same thing in Nigeria, they may give them to you. So this is more for that I use in California, but we would do exhibit lists of every document, every transaction that we want to show in court. We have financial analysts that will do a source and application of funds analysis as to the funds that were applied, how much money and when, so that we can track what a business was doing and whether or not they were laundering money. So for example, here you have a ledger of everything that they use. If you can prepare that and have a witness testify about that in court and show it to the judge, you can help establish that money laundering or a financial fraud occurred. So if you have an accountant in your midst, or you can contract one to help you analyze these records, it might help NAPTIP get one or associate with one that can help you manually analyze these records to help make your case. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will answer them. But I will leave you with this, and this is very important with what you do, and I think with international crimes. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said that an injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And that is the nature of human trafficking. And so these injustices that you are preventing here have global impact and are very important. And I very much thank you and commend you for your work with NAPTIP. You're doing an incredible job. If we can assist in any way, please let us know. Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for him. Another round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anthony. It's good. All the information that is being shared, it's good and relevant to what we are doing here, and we are assuring you that we will go on, and I'm sure NAPTIP, they are assuring us that going forward, they will apply it somehow to their work, and we will achieve the same result, and even better results as we go forward. Thank you so much. And it's now time for us to take our lunch break. And we'll go, maybe a side will go first because the room is small, it's not big like this, so that we don't have a rush in the room at the buffet table. But you can be assured that today we made adequate arrangements so that nobody will be left out. So we'll go for lunch break now. It's going to be for 1 hour. So we're going to return at 3 o'clock to continue. The last session will be another paper, and then we are going to have our closing ceremony. We're going to give out the certificates, and I think that will be the end of it. So it's now for time for us to go for lunch. So please, I will employ this side. Please, maybe we should move first to the dining table, then the other side can come so that we don't have a rush. The room is small.